Hey everybody, welcome to Oregon State University's Permaculture Design Pro course. This is the winter and spring 2023 class. This is our very first office hours. It's great to see you all here today. I'm really excited for this course. I've been involved in this course since 2015, I think, 2015 or 2016 or 2014, somewhere around there. I helped to and spearheaded the design of the template and have been adding and creating more elements to the template and the course as I've been involved. For those of you that don't know yet, my name is Javin Curry-Bernakovich. I own and operate All Points Design. That's allpointsdesign.ca, as well as regenerativeliving.online. The first is a land and life design company. On the land design side, I help people to create abundant, diverse, and if necessary, profitable landscapes. I'll just ask everyone to mute themselves, and maybe I'll do a little master mute all. Perfect. And have worked on landscapes as large as 6,500 hectares all the way down to backyards. I've worked on communities, community centers, corporate installations, large-scale production farms, homesteads, you name it. On the other side of this, on the life design side, I have developed a process off of Alan Savory's holistic management and my late colleague Dan Palmer's holistic decision-making called values-based decision-making, which for me has been the most valuable tool I've had in regenerative landscape design. And basically what we do is we get a sense of what somebody's values are for a project, for a farm, for a landscape, for a life. And then we go about starting to use those values as a filter, as a way to filter actions and decisions. So in real time, we actually live our values. And in so many of the land design projects I've been in, that's been the difference between a very successful project or a project that people succumb to shiny thinginitis. This is the proclivity as many people who are involved in permaculture go, oh, that's interesting. I want to do that. Oh, I want to do hugelkultur, and I want to do composting toilets, and I want to do rainwater harvesting. And generally, I can tell you that the more you become conscientious about what excites you about permaculture, either the categories or the techniques or who you want to work with or how you want to work with them, because under permaculture, there's really no limit to what you might be able to do or offer. If you can narrow down, you'll be more and more and more successful over time. I've also worked with folks on emotional sovereignty, which I've found more and more working with couples and families has been the biggest impediment to actually having a successful land-based operation. Folks will bring me in to take a look at their books or to take a look at their enterprise, and it's actually the fact that they have some unresolved issue with each other that can become the problem. So that became a part of my life design work as well. I've also been involved in over 45 different regenerative businesses being created or people transitioning from their existing business to a regenerative business. And then on the other side, the Regenerative Living Institute, it's basically an e-learning platform that allows people to learn practical skills to stay on the planet as if we intend to stay without having to subscribe to an ideology. I will say this at least once during this call, and we'll probably say it other times. Permaculture is a tool. It's a tool in a toolbox. And I think as you get to know yourself and understand what it is you want to do in this world and how you want to express your essence, it can be a very powerful tool, but it is a mistake, in my opinion, to become identified as your tool. So if I'm a carpenter, I worked in carpentry and renovations for many years, and if somebody invites me into their house and they get really excited when I pull out a screwdriver and they say, oh, you're a screwdriverist, I should be concerned, because permaculture is a tool. It's a lens with which to look through the world. It has a number of tools within it and processes, but be conscientious not to deify anybody in this space, not to trust anybody just because they're in this space. You know, people should have trust earned, and to really look at it as, okay, this is an interesting tool that I can use. And there's a colleague of mine in Los Angeles, USA, who likes to say that we don't do permaculture, we use permaculture in what we do. And years ago, a good friend and colleague of mine, Diego Footer, put on these Permaculture Voices conferences that were just exceptional. And in I think it was the second one, I gave a lecture or a presentation all about how we need to be conscientious about our own function and our own niche and who we are as a person. So that way we can express that really well in permaculture. I think there's a mistake to become Robin Francis, or a mistake to become Joel Salatin, or a mistake to, become somebody else instead of really finding your uniqueness. And after I gave this presentation, I had a gentleman come up to me and he goes, I've been a mechanic for about 15 years of my life. I found permaculture 3 years ago, and I tried desperately to become a composter. He tried to create a commercial compost outfit and all the rest of it. And at the end, he's like, I think you saved me because you finally gave me permission to be a mechanic, but to use permaculture in what I do. And so he was more conscientious about the materials he used. He started to create biodiesel. He started to create these fleets of vehicles that he could work with. So really be conscientious about that bigger scope, that bigger scale, that bigger conversation. And to that point, there's a process that I've done for many years when I'm teaching a PDC. And in this class, kind of in a weird hybrid role, because we'll meet on Mondays, every other Mondays at this time. And you have an opportunity to ask any questions you want. We can have discussions. We can do a lot with our time here. It tends to get filled up with question and answer pretty quickly. But we can also help you to start to narrow down, especially if you're trying to become a designer or you're trying to go into work, we can narrow down what it is you love. So my recommendation to you is to take 2 pages of your notebook or to document, and on one side, write fire, and on the other side, write compost. One side, write fire, one side, write compost. And every week when you're going into a new module, go back on the previous week and really list out like all the things that fired you up, that excited you, that made you go, oh yeah, I love this work. I'm so glad I'm taking this course. And be conscientious about everything that wasn't a pure 10. So a lot of people think they have to love human manure composting to be in permaculture. And I remember once long ago when I went to a permaculture convergence, and I remember somebody saying to somebody else, oh, you're into permaculture. And they were like, what does your composting toilet look like? And the other person said, I don't have a composting toilet. And you could just see the judgment coming from the other person. So full permission to love and work with the things you like. And then on the other side, on that compost side, put all the things you don't like. And those could be main topics. You could not like water, and that's okay. Like you just don't want to work with water. You'd much rather work with community engagement. I had the opportunity to go to Cuba and work with Cuban permaculturists, and they're great. I love Cuba because it's so practical due to the special period and the embargo of US. And they've always really been a robustly pragmatic and able people. But I love permaculture down in Cuba because they have permaculture practitioners and permaculture promoters. There are people who just love permaculture and they still work for the government, or they still do the work they do, but they're hyper involved in community building and promotion and all the rest of it. So highly recommend you take this process. And if you do this process, one of the last 2 sessions that we have, I'll tell you what to do with all that information to help you narrow it down, because basically you'll have a bunch of raw data and you'll need to filter it to get a better sense of it. And I may as well just tell you now. You'll ask 3 questions of the elements you put down there. 1, does this excite me? So it's kind of a double check. If it's in the fire list, it should already excite you. 2, do I have skill in this? And 3, am I more for this, or is this regenerative? This is one of the elements within permaculture that I came to very early on. We can do an energy audit of pretty much anything, any system, any tool, any technology, any process. And we can do this energy audit by asking, is it regenerative? Is it generative? Another word for generative is sustainable, and I'll get to that in a second. Or is it degenerative? If it's regenerative, there's more than there was before. So when we have ruminants that are grazing on trees, generally they'll nibble on trees that will send what's called an auxin, which is a plant hormone, down to the crown of the tree, which is the brain of the tree. The crown is where the stem becomes the roots, and it'll go, we're dying, produce more. And so grazing will actually produce more tree. In the same way, wind produces wood. If you have a tree and you do a round cut of it, you'll find if it's in a major wind center, the center of the tree won't be in the center. It'll actually be closer to where the wind is, and you'll get these big ogives of wood on the back side. So, wind creates wood, browsing creates more trees. It's a regenerative cycle. It's a regenerative system. When we're talking about regenerative is the same as sustainable. People are crazy, gaga over sustainable. I want a sustainable society. I don't want a sustainable society. A sustainable society is a society that's the same. If you're a musician or you listen to music, a sustained note is the same note. There's very little about the society globally and locally within countries that is sustainable. Anything I'd want to see sustained. So sustainable and generative to me are the same word. And it basically means it's the same. You know, if we have what we have, it'll be what we have. Degenerative means that there's less than we have before. So a number of practices and processes, burning petroleum fuels, we have less than we have before. It's not a regenerative aspect. So regenerative, generative, degenerative. This is one of those questions I ask on everything within the fire and compost list, because when I started, I would do things I thought I should do to be a good permaculturalist when I thought I was a tool for a long time. And it really led me astray, because there were other elements within permaculture, other elements within regenerative land design that fired me up, and I would still be more for it. Teaching is one of those things. I get really excited for the times I get to teach. I get really excited for presenting. I get really excited for sharing information. And it's very important that you be conscientious about the elements within this field that make you go, oh, I want to learn more. So 3 questions you ask: does this excite me? Do I like this? Do I have any skill in this? And then, am I more for this? Is this regenerative in terms of my interest? And from there, you get sort of a smaller area that you can start to hit in terms of what do you want to go back for? Because a permaculture design course is basically like a massive buffet of these incredible topics and tools and strategies and techniques and people that, for those of us that, and I love so many of your introductions, there was Eco Awakening and End of Suburbia moment. A lot of people talked about their moment, their switch that made them go, I don't really know if society is what I really want to be involved in. I want to be in something new, something regenerative. So that can be a way to really narrow down your focus and become more conscientious. Any questions about that? Is that pretty straightforward? Any thoughts specifically about that? We've got a chance to go through other questions in a moment. And feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question, or raise your hand on Zoom, or put your question in the chat. Anything like that is all good. Okay, seems pretty straightforward. Awesome. Cool. So that's an introduction to me. That's an introduction to generally how to look at permaculture. That's an introduction to how to systematically go throughout the course and kind of be conscientious what you're stoked about. Looks like my microphone just changed. Just going to check that out. Yeah, I don't know why it unplugged. There we go. Cool. So first thing I want to do is I want to give a little bit of a tour of Canvas. Full disclosure, I'm not a huge fan of the way everything's laid out in Canvas, and it can be kind of confusing. So I just wanted to show you at least a little bit of our backend as a group, and generally what posting and sharing looks like, and all those good things. So it's pretty clear to everybody, because sometimes it can be confusing. So if you go to our discussion board, Javan's group discussion board, you'll see pinned posts and unpinned posts. And basically, these are the posts that you will be posting predominantly your assignments and some other elements. So at the top here, we've got the Zoom hours, and arguably, if you're watching this, you know quite a bit about what's here already. So one thing to keep note of is that we have the previous office hours, and this is a massive list of all the different office hours we've had thus far. And if you see something that is interesting in the title, like concept design for horses, so maybe you're working with horses and you want to know a little bit more about that, or hedgerow selections, or ethics and earthworks, you know, any of these, you can click on to these videos, which will go to my YouTube page. And then you can go down to the bottom, and basically all the questions are linked. So you can go down and you can see, wondering if you've had to deal with Japanese beetles, or time management to finish the course, or how do you calculate how many vegetables to grow for a family of 5? Great question, actually. And that will all be in here. So this is a nice resource. Going back again, that's right at the top of our office hours. Then there's the YouTube channel link. George Cow's etiquette for Zoom meetings is great. It looks like most of you have seen it because I can see most of your faces, which I love. And the other great thing about George is just he wants to have communication and some community building. We've got our question and answer doc, which most of you are on right now. And the way this works, you'll see on the left-hand side, we've got a summary, and we can turn that off and turn that on. And down here, we've got a couple different elements. We've got the Zoom login information. We have previous office hours again. We have the student question format. So please, when you are posting your question, bold your name and where you're from, and then a link to your site project if anything in your question has to do with your site. So this basically links directly to your template, and that way I can go to your template and take a look at it. And if you're asking a question specifically about a certain element within your template, not just the first slide, maybe it's slide, for him it was the base map, so he already did this. Just make sure that you click on the slide it is, and then triple click the URL at the top. That'll take me directly to the slide, and you'll want to do that as well when you're submitting your assignments. So assignment number 1, you don't have to do that because we're right at the beginning, but all previous assignments when we're submitting, let's say week 5, which is the water assignment, you'll want to go to the beginning of the water slides, which is water survey, click on there, triple click your URL, and then copy and paste that as a hypertext link when you're submitting. So that's the questions. I have been compiling since 2009 a master list of resources, which is large. These are books, these are resources, mostly books, some videos, some articles, some things of that nature. And as I continue to work with colleagues and new instructors with regenerative living, we just keep building this over and over and over. So there's some great inspirational elements here. And if you ever want to add something, feel free to let me know if you've got something great, and I'd be happy to put it there. Great. A lot of people ask about plant ID. It wasn't a strength of mine. It's become a growing strength, I'll say, of mine. So there's a couple of apps that are great. And the other thing I'll say is, and I still use this, there's a couple of Facebook groups and Reddit groups. What plant is this? What bug is this? I still post there because there are elements I don't know. These are a couple of books that folks have asked about in the past: How to Grow More Vegetables Than You Ever Thought Possible, Profitable Urban Farming by Curtis Stone, The Market Gardener by J.M. Fortier, Edible Eco Solutions by Zach Lokes. This is a great book to get into mushrooms if you're new to mushrooms. This is the Big Daddy book for, I'll say, community mushroom cultivation, because Paul Stamets' monster books are pretty brilliant. His mushroom cultivation and gourmet cultivation. If you're interested in dams, this is a brilliant book, which I've made available to everybody because Katie Nelson made it available, and goes through very simply how to create simple earthen dams. Katie worked all over Eastern Africa as I did as well, and this is a great book. Also, if you're dealing with erosion, this is a great book by the Quivera Coalition. If you're brand new to understanding plants, if plants were totally not in your sphere of influence as they were to me, besides cutting down trees when I was a kid in 2008, 2009, when I started to learn about this. Botany in a Day by Thomas L. Bell is probably one of the best books to really introduce the different kingdoms, to start to understand different anatomy and physiology about plants, just so you can start to build comprehension. I'll probably talk about live staking, and at some point in the class, somebody will ask about how do you work with steep slopes, or how do you work to revegetate an area? And I'll talk probably about David Polster's work. This is a colleague of mine, she's currently out of Nairobi, Natalie Topia, and she's currently working for the UN, which is unfortunately why she had to pull out of a course that we were working in, because the UN doesn't allow you to do any side hustles. But this was a great, just really good presentation about how she stopped the erosion on a mountainside by starting at the top and then creating what she calls a water prison for the entire mountain, going all the way down. And then last but not least, there's always a number of courses that are going on that either I'm involved in or I think is really important. So This is an amazing process that I go through every single year about understanding what the last year has been, what the next year could be, and just really helping people to become clear on their values, and also to be conscientious about the good and the bad from the previous year, because so many people like to perseverate and just, concentrate on the bad. So this is a great course that I run in December. It's self-paced now. So if you want to walk through it or take a look at it, you can take a look at it there. We have a course called Coppice Agroforestry with Mark Krawczyk that's starting tonight. This is a really cool summit, which I think it has a cost to it. But if you're looking at becoming a landscape designer on an urban scale, these folks basically host a number of different designers and could be a great thing for you. We've got a propagation course coming up in April, a rainwater harvesting course, and a greywater design course. So there we go. That's that canvas walkthrough. Let's do the template walkthrough next. Oh, actually, let's talk about resubmitting. Okay, so if you ever get in a spot where I find that there's something missing, and the rubric is pretty straightforward. So if you just read the rubric, chances are you'll get all the marks you need. But let's say, and usually folks need to resubmit their base map because they don't read all the pieces and don't look at all the tutorials. So there's chances are you'll have an opportunity. Here we go. Kendra was great. So basically what you'll do is when you post, you'll say, hey, here's my link. And usually, where did the slides, but make sure that your link goes directly to that slide. I give video feedback. This allows me to give a lot more feedback in a shorter amount of time, and I can draw and I can do different things within that feedback. So if that's great for you, fantastic. If you'd rather text, I can. And when I give that feedback, you have the option, if your mark is low, to resubmit. And so that's what Kendra did. She resubmitted, and she also just listed out all the different elements that she resubmitted. So that's a really important piece to say, hey, Javin, I did this. I put in the utilities. I made sure that my compass rose was more visible, whatever it is I find. So just make sure that when you resubmit, that you point out what it is that was missing. So that way I can go through it rather quickly. Let's go back to our notes, where to ask questions. Okay, template walkthrough. Awesome. So I'm going to stop this unless I'm seeing any questions. I'm not seeing anything in the chat. I'm not seeing anything extra. Okay, cool. So as long as everybody's still walking along with us and we're still relatively copacetic and happy, I'm going to go over to the template and just give you a little bit of an introduction and point out that the majority of all of your questions that you have about this template is going to be above in the video tutorials. So I've spent a couple of years developing video tutorials, continue to develop them. And so if there's anything that's missing, if I've made a mistake, let me know. But generally, going through these tutorials will help you to develop an understanding about how to work with Google Slides, how to go through the different elements of it, how to bring images in, how to manipulate things, how to change the background, how to change this element here, which is the title there. So, all of the pieces are here. There is a full list of the templates. So if you're one of those people that just wants to go through the list of those by themselves, you can. And then on the right-hand side, this is something that's been really fun over the last couple of years. We have an incredible array of student examples. Some of these student examples are what to do, and some of these student examples are what not to do. So they're here for a full comprehension to take a look at it. And you'll see generally the ones that go above and beyond. And the other thing is, as you start to understand that there are different elements within classification of land, one of them is called a Copen-Geiger classification, which you'll learn about in next module. You can align with your site, and you can actually start to get a sense of, oh, this is actually close to my site. So you may be in a rural setting that's a CSA, Copen-Geiger classification. I've also made little highlights on the right-hand side. So you'll see, normally I'm pointing out the good. So if you're looking for different elements there, if anything is currently unbolded, it just means that I've yet to receive permission from these folks to show their work. And as I'm going through my current work, I'm constantly adding new ones. So this is a great element to have and to look through. And then there's some specifics here that are really exceptional. Adria Foch is probably one of the top 10 assignments that I've had in my entire work with OSU. So highly recommend you take a look at hers. You'll see a lot of her slides actually within the template when you slide to the right. So generally we have examples on the right-hand side here. So if you scroll to the right, you can see examples of what elements look like, and then get a sense of what and how those examples can influence your design work. What else did I want to say about the template? Bolded highlighting. This is a great example. Okay. So bolded highlighting is a little hack I found maybe, I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago. And I was working with clients, and generally there's a lot of text that you present to client when you're designing. And they generally don't care. That text is usually for you and your note taking, all the rest of it. So what I started to do, because I have a great love of graphic novels and comic books, and I noticed that in graphic novels and comic books, they bolded, highlighted all the information, and it made it really easy to scan the page. I started to bold highlight a lot of different elements within my design work. And the result was clients got the gist of it really quickly. They were really able to understand and get quick on what we were looking at. So I really highly recommend that you start to adopt bolded highlighting in all of your text for your assignment. It'll make it easy for your grader, me, to go through your work. It'll make it easy for your colleagues, your classmates to take a look at elements, and it'll just go very quickly to go through the material. So highly recommend that. Go back to my notes. Okay, how to get the most value out of the course. Let's talk about that. So we have 20 weeks together. We alternate between office hours and submission. And as somebody has asked, and we'll answer this now, yes, indeed, you can submit early, and I highly recommend you do. In this class, we have a shorter break. I think we only have like a week or maybe 10 days break. So generally during that time, I recommend you move forward and you work ahead as much as possible. But making sure that you're in advance, or if you submit early because you have a question or you want to get some feedback from design, totally fine. If you want feedback on design live during office hours, totally fine. Any question on the sun as it pertains to this course, I'm happy to answer. And if we finish with those questions and you have more questions about how I view regenerative land design, because I'm not here to teach you my process of land design. I'm here to teach you permaculture, which is one tool in the toolbox. But if we have extra time, I'm happy to share with you what I've learned since 2009 when I started this work. So generally, get your assignments in on time. Great way to get value out of the course. And as students start to give you feedback and I give you feedback, start a dialogue. If somebody's asking you questions or if somebody's giving you resources, look up those resources, start to create a conversation out of it. It can be a fantastic way to create a lot of connectivity within the course. And because it's online, it's the only way for us to do that. The other thing I would suggest is if you find people in this class that you enjoy either their work or they're like-minded or they are like site design. So they have a similar site design, either it's all urban or it's the same state or the same city or the same climate. Create a little study group or create a learning partner that on the weeks that you don't meet for office hours, you meet with them. The folks that do this have been just meteoric in their rise after this course. I've seen students go right into a design business after this course because they asked me a ton of questions. They asked their classmates questions. They probed their weaknesses. They had a study group they met. So generally, I would say engage with this material in as much effort and approach as you would like to leave in terms of your success, your capacity, and your overall capability. That's one of the best ways to get value out of this course. The other is to respond to my requests for information if I give that to you in video. And the other is to read the rubric. I have 15 minutes to mark your assignments. It's what I'm given from OSU. And if I have to pick apart rubric pieces like you don't have a scale bar, or you don't have this, or you don't have that. It just takes a lot of time away from what I could be giving you feedback on in terms of your designer's mind. The other thing is if you're really struggling with something, reach out, send me an email, javin@allpointsdesign.ca, or you can use Canvas. Generally send me an email via my email because I get it directly, and just say, hey, I'm really struggling with this. Can we jump on Zoom? And usually I can resolve anything on Zoom within 10 or 15 minutes. So you are really struggling. If you've looked through all the tutorials, great. Know that if you come to me and you ask me a question that's on the tutorial, I'll tell you to go watch the tutorial. So just be conscientious that we've done a pretty extensive detailed job to make sure that any question you might have is going to be in the tutorials. And if there is something that's totally amiss, please do reach out. Okay, I think that's the value. We talked about additional courses. Stupendous. Okay, so I'm going to start answering questions here now. And generally, I really like it if I get questions early. If I get questions early, I can precog them. So, if you're having a question as you're going through material, just feel free to go to the doc and to type it in. And that means that when I take a look at the questions, usually on Sunday, I can start to write them out. And I like this a lot more because it gives me a sense to think about it. And especially if you've got a question about design. So if you're showing me a base map or you're showing me, an issue, it's a great way to do it. So Elias, since all materials are available on the platform, is it okay to send assignments in advance? I admit I have more free time in the first months. Absolutely. I usually have some extra time during the week. And if I'm able to review all of the current assignments and the late assignments, I'll mark any assignments that are submitted in advance. So I will mark the current week's assignments first. If you're late, I will then go back and mark those assignments. And then if you're early, I'll definitely mark those. Great question. Thanks so much. Taylor, how do I find average snow depth? Minneapolis. So depth isn't usually a climate metric that's well historically documented. You can find total accumulation or average accumulation depending on the data set. So generally, the NRCS data set, the Weather Blue, Blue Spark, and Weather Underground usually will have accumulation, but they won't necessarily have snowpack. That's usually a separate state department, provincial department, or regional department, depending on where you are in the world. I know in Canada, we have a snowpack monitor, but I would then look for snowpack instead. You'll usually get a sense of, what is the total amount. The other thing that's important to note here is that not all snow is equal. I think most people know that the Inuit, at least in Canada, have close to, I think, 135 different words for snow. So wet snow versus dry snow is different in terms of what it then melts down to into total volume of precip. So generally it's somewhere between, and this is a huge range, it's somewhere between half to 1/10. So if you had 10, you're in Minneapolis, so let's use Imperial. If you have 10 inches of dry, fluffy snow, it'll usually become 1 inch of precip. If you have 10 inches of wet, heavy snow, it'll usually become 5 or 4 inches of precip. So that conversion can be problematic depending on the snow you receive. But generally, if it's total annual, I'll use somewhere in the order of, half to 40%, something like that. Selecting a weather station. Oh yeah, I asked you to give me some more questions. Yes, I was wondering if there's any kind of standard you recommend for selecting a weather station for drawing our info from. For example, distance from station, proximity. For my project in particular, the MSP International Airport Weather Station has lots of good and easy to find data, but it's 11 miles away. There are other closer weather stations, 4 and 6 miles, but I'm having trouble finding their data. Okay, so this is a great question to really focus on data. So in general, data is a great place to begin our observations. It is a terrible place to stop. So I will, and I'm currently doing remote assessments for folks, and I can only go off the data that's there. So usually the granularity of that data is off either due to distance, elevation, proximity to major topographic features, or proximity to major bodies of water. All of those and a number of other aspects can change the localized weather, the microclimate dramatically. So generally what I do is I just state the biases or the assumptions. So if I've got a weather station that's, 15 clicks away and 12 clicks away and 10 clicks away, I'm basically putting in more information there. And usually, and it's funny, we used to have this in the template, but there were complaints that it was too much information. But because I work in design and I do this, what I'll do is I will actually add in a column here, and I'll give the different, I'll give the different values. So if we're like 2 or 3 different, and I think that's what Lauren did actually. Yeah, she did. So she had the design site that she collected data from. She had Coburg and Peterburg, and basically showed all the different elements, but at the same time showed the bias, which is, design site is 275 meters and Coburg 79. Like that's a dramatic change. Not to mention, I also think that the distance, where's her distance here? I don't know if I'm seeing it. It might be in the next one. Yeah. So basically just state the bias of it and generally use it with a grain of salt. So if you've got really good data that's 11 miles away, and let's say we're asking for, I don't know, average precip, and the ones that are 4 and 5 miles away don't have any, then you're going to default to the 11 mile away. And generally it's a good idea to start to think about putting in or starting to record data on site. So why might it not be suitable? It's an international airport. Generally, the weather data from international airports is exceptional in terms of the quality of the data, the reporting interval, the frequency, the rigor. The only reason it may not be as valuable is if you say, it's 11 miles away and we have a mountain right beside us and the Minnesota International Airport doesn't. So again, it's saying what the data is lacking. So it's stating the bias and the caveats and then working from there. So Taylor, does that answer your questions? Did you have anything you wanted to add to that? I'm just going to check the chat while I wait for your response.
No, that was really good. Thank you very much.
Perfect. Thanks, mate. Awesome. Great. Willis, if you could, please add your question to the doc that we're working on here, because it would be great to get that information there as well. Umesh, great. Yeah, Umesh, I copied your question over here, and some people were having issues, so I reset the permission. So everyone should be able to click on this link now. And if folks have come recently, just click on the link I'm putting in the chat now, just to make sure you can, put a couple of words in there just to make sure you can, and then delete them. So Umesh had a really good question. I need a bit more clarity on the design part and what tools you would suggest to do the job in the best manner possible. Because I'm choosing the digital design route, so I don't have any experience or interest in drawing. If I have to learn a tool that would give me great results with beautiful designs, then I would choose and train with it. Expert advice, please. Okay, let's talk about this, because this tends to be the part that people get the most frustrated by. And a lot of people come into this course thinking that we're teaching rendering. And if you go back to the course page, we very clearly say this is not a rendering course. This is a course on design. And up until, I think about 6 or 7 years ago, we didn't even have a template for people to use. People just basically figured themselves out as they did. So yeah, basically whatever design process that allows you to quickly and easily render what's in your head onto a piece of paper, onto a digital or a physical piece of paper, that takes the least amount of effort during this course is what you should do. Why do I say that? Because if you're already learning permaculture, you shouldn't be learning a rendering program on top of it. Specifically, if you have issues or problems or history of not getting along with technology or digital design assets or things of that nature. I will explain what I do, and then I will give you a suggestion on what you should do. So my process is I take in data and get GIS overlays and I usually put them into Google Earth Pro, the desktop edition. I do not use the browser edition. I do not like it. It has constraints to it. And I'm not wanting to become a GIS expert, geographical information systems. I don't want to become an expert in technology. And this is due to a mentor of mine who basically said, be conscientious about what you invest time in. And do you want to invest your time in thinking or invest your time in technology? And so generally, I know how to use GIS programs. I know how to use QGIS, which is the open source program, which if you are interested in GIS, you like map making, you like processing data, it's an open source program that I recommend. There's ArcGIS, which is paid for, and QGIS generally has the functionality of ArcGIS. But Google Earth Pro is user-friendly, which means I can usually render designs and work on designs to a concept level on Google Earth Pro, and can share those documents with my clients. The other reason why I like Google Earth Pro is I can take applications like GPS Kit on iOS, on Mac. So if you have an Apple phone, or Gaia GPS on Android, and if I turn on the geo-referencing function on the photos, I can go into a landscape and I can take photos and I can get geo-referenced material. I can take notes and I can import them into Google Earth Pro, which is phenomenal. That means I can be looking at the site in a plan view or at an acute view, and I can start to have all of my site visit photos. This also allows clients to take snapshots of different elements within their site, which is phenomenal because now you can see process pics throughout a site's development. So that's the reasons why I use Google Earth Pro. The other thing I've used and really enjoy, because I used to do all my designs by hand. I used to use my templates. I used to use pen and paper. I used to have these big boards. But once I saw the light of graphic tablets, I moved off of that pretty quickly. I'll still do some freehand drawing on paper every once in a while, but because of the layering capacity of iPad or graphic tablets like the Galaxy Tabs out of Samsung or others, and because you can bring them in the field, and because the brightness of the background has now improved so dramatically, that's what I use. I'm trying to see if it's anywhere near me. I don't think it is. So I've got a 2018 iPad Pro 12.9. And if you are interested in the iPad Pro, the technology, I would suggest the second gen pencil. The first gen pencil is terrible. And you don't have to get the Pro. The applications that you would be running would be fine on the regular iPads. Unfortunately, they use the Gen 1 pencils. I originally used an app called Procreate, which you can use, but generally doesn't have any georeferencing. So what I mean georeferencing is it doesn't pull information from Google Earth and then put it and render it in scale. And so generally I moved away from Procreate, and then I found an amazing application called Morpholio Trace on iOS. I haven't found a commiserable app that works on Android tablets, so I can't recommend anything right now. But there's talk that Morpholio Trace will eventually come to Android, and I like it because it's for architects. You can bring in information from Google Maps. You can bring in terrain data immediately. If you bring in a drawing, you can size and scale it immediately. It has layers that you can turn off and on, and it has a number of brush tools. And the other thing I love is that it has a stencil tool. So if you're not used to drawing different symbols for trees and plants and all the rest of it, it has a whole library that you can use. And it's very easy to size and work with. And if you go into the previous office hours, there's a very in-depth, I think it's about 45 minutes long, where I go into Morpholio Trace and Google Earth Pro. And just take a look for iPad design or digital design. That's my process. What do I suggest you do? If you've never worked with any sort of graphical program before, I recommend you just stick to the Google Slides. Just learn the process of taking different shapes, drawing shapes, going through the tutorials and putting them in. The one thing that Google Slides doesn't have is a layer system. It basically has a system where if you have something on something else, you'll see that it's on something else. So trying to see what I've got here. Yeah, so we've got a piece of paper. So generally, if you see something on top of something else, it's in front of it, and you basically right click and say move behind or move to back, and it'll physically move back and forth. It's a little cumbersome to be sure, but it's free, totally accessible, and anybody can use it. If you wanted to start using a more professional application, but you didn't want to spend the exorbitant fees that Adobe works with, I would recommend Affinity Designer, and then Illustrator. Generally, they're like 40 or 50 bucks, and they're usually on sale at 50% off. And they have all the functionality of Adobe Designer. So if you do want to go that route, you can. If you want and you like that route of design in terms of Adobe Designer or Affinity Designer, United Designers, that was created by Dan Housley, has an entire process as well as an entire library of using Adobe. Generally, I think their pricing practices are prohibitory and predatory, so I don't use Adobe. I went through the process of learning how to use it, but generally, I like using a pen and paper. I like drawing. I don't like using my screen and just pointing and clicking as much as other people. I have used Google Earth. I have used Google SketchUp, which for some people works. They like it. The problem with Google SketchUp is you also need something called SketchUp Layout, which then produces a plan out of what you've done. But I'm working with a former student in this class to develop a course in that. The great thing is you can actually get quantities and bills of sale, or a bill of quantities. So there can be some value of that. What was the name of the app that geo-referenced photos? So in iOS, that's Apple phones, it's called GPS Kit. When I bought it years ago, I think it was 13 or 15 bucks. I'm sure it's more now. And for Android, that is Gaia GPS. If you're looking for something totally free, you can use Inkscape or GIMP, G-I-M-P. But generally, you're going to have to develop a whole database of different symbols and processes and all the rest of it. So one of the reasons why we created the template and use Google Slides is because it's readily available. It's easy to put together. And I'll say this much. Years ago, I was schooled in having to put together a beautiful rendered design and make it look like it was architecturally rendered and all the rest of it. And another instructor in this course, Neil Bertrando of RT Permaculture, showed me his PowerPoint designs, and he would design in PowerPoint, and they were simple, and the artist in me was offended to look at them. But I realized the genius in them is that the majority of our work is done in our minds. It's done in, looking back and forth, taking a look at overlays, seeing the different influences. And he really put it to his clients and said, do you want to pay me for beautiful renders, or do you want to pay me to put them in? And without exception, they're like, no, I want you to put it in. I want you to put it in the ground. Don't spend time making a beautiful design or paying somebody else. So he uses still PowerPoint because it's easy. He knows how to use it and it's quick. So be very conscientious about how much energy and time you put into learning a digital tool to get an output that if you're doing the installs, you don't really need that. So just be conscientious about that. So I use, again, somebody's asking privately, just make sure to put your, if you're putting questions onto Zoom, just make sure to make sure it's to everyone. So I use Google Earth Pro, the desktop edition, free, great, awesome, highly recommend learning how to use it. I use Morpholio Trace on my iPad, which is a 2018 12.9 Pro. I went for the larger version just so I had more screen real estate to work with. And then I use Google Drive. So usually I develop my reports as I'm designing, and I use the Regrarian scale of permanence, which was originally created by, or was based upon P.A. Yeoman's scale of permanence for all things agricultural. So basically it said that climate is first and foremost, so understand the climate, and then from the climate, you'll understand topography, and from topography, you'll understand water flow, and from water flow, you'll understand access. P.A. Yeomans and the Regrarians and Darren Doherty are just brilliant, fantastic resources. Darren has the Regrarians Handbook, I think up to chapter 6 or 7 on regrarians.org. Highly recommend you get into those resources and books because they are exceptional. Question, are there apps for 3D design you have tried? Yes, so I have used Google SketchUp. Generally, I find outside of organizations that are submitting for grants, large-scale developments, or governmental clients, most people don't want to spend money on a 3D design. So generally, I tell everyone that I will get them to a concept plan that comes out of Google Earth Pro. I don't tell them that I will spend the time to do Morpholio Trace. If they want me to, I will. And if they want a render, I've got a good render I can show you guys. What was that called? Here we go. If they want a render, I will usually contract out, because I don't want to spend my time moving around pixels. I would much rather just have something that I can understand and then send to a renderer. So I've got a number of GIS contractors, and I have a number of renderers that I will use that will then render my designs, because I just really don't want to spend the time doing that work, because I want to spend the time on landscape. So this was a design I did, how long ago? 6 years. It was here it is. It was for a drug and rehab center. And so I worked with Georgi Pavlov, who's an amazing renderer. He uses Blender and basically does photorealistic elements. And, you know, always think about what am I producing and what do I want out of the end of it? So they need to run this by their board. So we need to do something a little bit more fancy. And so I just make sure to ask that at the beginning, and then I put that into my estimate for what the cost will be. Okay. How's that for an answer on many different types of digital design? Do we have follow-up questions for that? If so, either raise your hand or put it on the doc or Zoom. Tim, follow-up question from Snow. I wanted to ask a follow-up question on snow. Is snowfall included in the total amount of precip that falls on a location? Is that extra? No, it's total. Yeah. So for many of us, my site in Canada was 450 milliliters of water or precip per year, and that included snowfall. So a lot of the data you find will be split out. And the reason this is important is designing for snowfall is different than designing for rain. In many situations, what we're doing is even the way we position our trees is in such a way so that way snowfall will be held back on the north side of the north hemisphere, on the south side of the south hemisphere, and it will slowly melt instead of sublimate. Sublimation is when a substance will go, mostly water. There's a few other substances that do it, but mostly water will skip its liquid phase and it'll go directly from a solid into a gas. And we definitely want to avoid that as we're moving into a very dry future, or more accurately, we're moving into a future where the majority of our rainfall comes concentrated and isn't as distributed throughout the year. So as we get into snow and snow elements, for those of you that are in cool temperate climates, it's usually separated out. Good question. Taylor, I find the resources on the very first slide very useful. Thank you. Do you want us to save these links elsewhere and delete these items, or can we leave them until the final submission? Yeah, so generally what I like when I get a submission is I like most of the arrows that are like pointing to the, I'm just going to find one that's got a lot of them, that are pointing to and on a slide. I generally like them to be deleted. Okay, this is a good one. So I'll show you the sectors one. So this is sector analysis. You'll get to this in week 3, I think, which is actually week 6 for you folks. So like when we have these wildlife sectors and paths and things like that on the bottom, I just like you, even if you want, just pull it down and move it out of the way. If you absolutely are done with it, just delete it as you do with all the blues. But in terms of, the things on the left-hand side and the right-hand side, feel free to keep them there. That's totally fine. Generally, I like this to be clear. So, delete video tutorials. And I think video tutorials eventually goes away. There is one thing I do want to say, because people tend to get confused by this. Choose a horizontal title bar or a vertical title bar, depending on your site. So if you need a little bit more vertical space here, then go with a vertical or go with a horizontal. We don't need both on the slide, and you may want to switch back and forth, but generally you're going to want to go with a horizontal title bar. It'll just make it easier for the long term. And then when you do submit, you don't have to submit, with horizontal title bar. You can remove that. That's not necessary. Another question people will ask me is, hey, my site's this way. Can I change my site instead of having north is up? And it's fine. If you have a site that is, thin and narrow, sometimes what we'll do is we'll do a couple of little detailed designs. So that way we have separate base maps for each of the sections. Actually, I can show you Woders. Woder is a student from South Africa that we're working with right now. And I think his is a great example of this. I'm just going to go pop over to his base map. Yeah, here we go. But generally, you can detail into something. The other question I get quite a bit is, my site's too big or too long or too whatever. Can I focus on a certain area? Absolutely. Highly recommend doing that. I think that's a great idea. So if the site's huge and just monstrous and you've got a lot to look at and a lot to work with, highly recommend you focus on just being very specific and focusing on a small area. Specifically, if you are in an area or in a conversation where there's a lot there. So you don't have to take on everything. You can just take on a little bit and work at it that way. Just taking a look at the time, we're probably going to run 5 or 10 minutes over. So if you have to leave, no problems. That's totally fine. So here's Woder's base map. And so you can see here, we've got a big, long area. And as he went into it, he really wanted to make something that was a little bit more specific. So he has these little callouts. He has his main base map, and then he has little callouts here just to show the different areas. So if that's your site, that's totally fine. And let's say that you have a site like this and you just want to work on, let's say, this area here. So generally what I would do is similar to what Woder did. And I'm just going to pull up my annotation tool here. I would do something like this and just say, okay, now this is my site, but this is the area I'm going to focus on. And then, do something like this, where this is the area that he's looking at. So, and then this will be your base map for the rest of the course. What you may want to do is keep that full base map, because on things like water flow and sector analysis and microclimates, you may want more data about the rest of your site. Great question. Just going to go back and see if there's any new questions. Okay. Any follow-up questions to any of the questions that I've answered, or anything else that's outstanding, or fears, quotes, comments, quotations, anything at all? Feel free to unmute or type in. Everybody's super clear.
Oh, I have a comment on, I liked the fire compost table a lot. And I was wondering, do I have skills in this? Like, there's a balance of what I'm already good at and what I'm willing to learn. And so it's always like, what do I need to grow behind the goals that I have?
Yeah, great question. And I think that becomes clearer the more we explore the course material. So, a lot of people, all right, I'm going to make a gender stereotype. There's something about young men, and I was one of them, that come through a PDC and all they want to do is make food forest companies. They just want to I just want to make food forests the world over, which is great and lovely. But you have to ask yourself a very important question. And this is a question that I wish I'd asked myself when I started in 2009, which is, am I eligible to create a food forest company right now? And at the time I didn't. I had never planted a tree. I could barely identify trees. I wasn't eligible to make a company. Had I made companies before? Yeah, I had a landscaping company, but it was a landscaping company of mowing grass and digging flower beds. I didn't know anything. It was just, a young thing you do. And, you steal your parents' lawnmower and truck, and, they're basically funding the whole thing. So the big question is, at the end of this, what am I eligible for? And this is one of the things I find when people give me their expectations for the course. And they're like, after this course, I'll be able to design any landscape, no problem. That's wrong. It took me close to 3 years to feel confident, let alone have all the information necessary to really see a landscape and start to decode it and understand it and all the rest of it. All of us, when we come into this work, have two major debts. Anything that's new, really. We have an ignorance debt, the things we don't know, and we have a time debt, the application of skill and attribute to make things clear and easy. So one of the things that I want to be very clear with is that you'll be better than you were if you apply yourself well throughout this course. But as Bill Mollison said famously, what can you say about somebody somebody after a PDC? I don't know. I don't know what you've done. I don't know what you've applied. I don't know where you're at. If you apply yourself well, you'll have one design in the bank. Will it be designed and installed? No. Will it be designed? Yes. The major thing you need to do after that, if you want to become a designer and do this full time and have this as something that is a major part of your income generation or your purpose-driven work, is you need a lot of practice. So you need to find friends and family who, in my opinion, as long as they're willing to install it, you'll work for free or cheap. Because the number one thing that new clients will need to see is, what the heck you're doing. They need to be like, oh, he can work with somebody, he can put it in. She knows how to evaluate what the water looks like. All of those pieces will come through if you have a design that's installed. It'll come through really, really clearly. So in that situation, I find photographs before and after important, testimonials from clients, things of that nature. So what I would say is for you, Robin, with the fire and compost list, use that, but also at the same time, continually check in and go like, what do I really want to do after this? Do I want to design urbanscapes? And a lot of people start there because there's lots of urbanites and there's lots of people that want to create like a grocery store landscape or an edible landscape or, whatever these terms are. And that's a great place to start because usually it's a little strip of perennials and it's a couple of garden beds and it's a couple of innovative water harvesting techniques. That's about it. Sometimes there's more, sometimes there's small greenhouses, sometimes there's in-ground gray water, sometimes there's some more complexity, but generally you can start off by going, yeah, I design wicking beds, which is a way of having a raised garden bed that has a water reservoir below that then feeds water into the soil and it feeds water from below. So that usually means you have a larger root mass, which you have a larger plant, and usually that plant is healthier. So that could be the first thing you do in a design business. I make wicking beds, I design them, I install them. That's what I do. And then after you've developed a skill that is of value to people, then you can add to it. Okay, great. Now I've got this. Now I really want to understand how to maybe plumb those into an existing rainwater harvesting system or design a rainwater harvesting system. Or maybe I want to be involved in gray water. One thing I want to caution people about is a lot of what we do in permaculture is illegal or not necessarily on the books in the places we work and live. So you have to ask yourself a question. Do you want to be involved in a policy change? Which is fine if you want to, but it's a whole different business and it's a whole different work and it's usually unpaid. So generally, I tend to work in areas that I have the skills I can work on in the attributes I can that are also regionally allowable. Or I work with clients that are happy to skirt that and they don't care. They just want something well designed. So I've got these three circles I think of in design. One is the inherent characteristics of a landscape. So what does the landscape actually want to do and be and experience? Years ago, I was asked onto a bison farm and they had an area that was overrun with water. And they said, hey, I was visiting with a friend. I wasn't even there as a consultant. And they said, oh, I've seen your work. And yeah, would you just look at this and give us your thoughts? And so I go out there and I'm looking at this wetland. Well, wetlands usually have water capture. And that water capture is usually not on property. And it's usually been there for millennia, or at least since you've had fault raises and things of that nature. And so I look at it because he wants to change it into pasture. He wants more pasture for his bison. And so I come back and I go, listen, mate, This place was a wetland before humans were even a glint in the eye of the world. It's going to be a wetland after all animals are dead. The way that the structure of this landscape works, this is wet. What I would do is I would plant tree fodder. These are trees that produce edible fodder for ruminants like bison, and probably a couple of fruit trees for myself, and do a little bit of terracing. And then be conscientious if you're in a protected wetland or if this is an off-books wetland, because in British Columbia, we have Water Sustainability Act that creates a lot of issues around wetlands. And he looks at me and he goes, that's the smartest thing that any of the 5 consultants that I've spent over $10,000 has said to me. The last one said, strip down to parent material, put in parent material into this wash, and then put topsoil back over. So first is this intrinsic characteristics of a landscape. The second is the client's wants, dreams, budget, skills. A lot of people will come to you and want to be a farmer, and they've never farmed before. They're not eligible to be a farmer right now. They should probably, instead of hiring you or me, which happens a lot, they should probably go and become a willing worker on organic farm, a woofer, or just go and volunteer or go get a farm job for a summer. They'll learn way more than hiring me to design their farm, and they'll understand more about what they want to do and be and all the rest of it. That third circle, which there's a pretty famous Canadian permaculturist who came back from a Jeff Lawton course and then just willy-nilly started designing and installing, and had multiple designs be issued in cease and desist order because they did not conform to the local regulations, is indeed local regulations. So those 3 circles: intrinsic characteristics of land, client wants, dreams, attributes, all that, the client circle, and then the regional regulations. Where they overlap is the sweet spot. It's what you can actually do in design. And sometimes the most important design you do is a simple little thing. Like my dad, who I use as an example through the whole template, really doesn't want a garden, really doesn't want to tend anything, but he wants it to look beautiful and lovely and all the rest of it. So the one piece of the design that he loved was a hugelkultur bed, raised box that's like 45, 50 feet long, that takes the water that comes off half of his roof and goes through a big O perforated pipe kind of midway through a big hugelkultur pile, which is a bunch of wood that's all layered inside of this box with soil on top. That was the one thing he loved. And it was a simple, easy thing he could do. He works in construction. He has access to offcuts of materials and roofing materials. And I thought he would tell me if he was doing something like that. And the next time I saw him, he's like, hey, take a look at this. And it was done. So sometimes it's just a little bit of a change in direction. Sometimes it's how people are approaching their composting. Sometimes it's, are they mulching? Sometimes it's just a little bit. So really be conscientious that you're not trying to make a design on a landscape. You're not trying to impose upon it. You're more so saying what works well here, and what is something that works with those 3 different circles of somebody. And then for you, be conscientious of your own circles. What overlaps of what you want to do, what is actually of interest to people locally to you, and what are people willing to pay for. So this is the other cautionary tale about the general stereotype of young men who want to go and make a food forest company. Generally, people don't know what the heck a food forest is. If you're talking an edible landscape, they have a bit of a sense. If they're talking about gardens, they have a bit of a sense. If they have a fruit tree, sure. An orchard, yeah, there's some familiarity. But I've been very conscientious not to use permaculture, if you go to allpointslanddesign.ca, in my official copy, because it's a piece of jargon that people have to get their head over. It's a tool I use. I don't need to tell people the tool I use. They don't come to me for the tool. They come to me for the result. I want a landscape that's beautiful. I want a landscape that's resistant to drought. I want a landscape that I love being in. Those are why people hire us. They don't hire us for a permaculturalist. They don't hire us so they can have a hammerist come in and use their hammer. They come for a result. So be conscientious about the results you want to provide, the results that you are currently skilled in, or the results that you would like to become skilled in and are willing to surmount the ignorance debt and the time debt, which are huge, and will enjoy it at the end of the day. That's why I got into permaculture, because when I was sitting in my original PDC and my instructor, Jan Steinman, said, the Prime directive of permaculture is to take care of your children. To take care of your children? What is it? I should know this. I'm teaching this. Prime directive of permaculture is to take responsibility for yourself and for that of your children. And the 3 ethics, as I was taught them, was take care of the planet. It's where all of our assets come from. Take care of people, because that's how we interact with that asset, and people are the assets we're trying to build. No. And then set limits to consumption and redistribute surplus. And then he gave me Holmgren's 12 principles. And I was like, I remember writing in my journal, I'd rather fail at this than succeed at almost anything else. And that fueled me through all my work. So I had that high level motivation. I was willing to get paid very little for a long time. But you have to ask yourself if your financial structure, if your family structure can support that. These days, my recommendation to people is take on jobs that you can be equanimous to, indifferent to, because you already have something else that pays the bills, and you can take on a job and you could do it really well because you don't have to be worried that it has to pay you. This is my advice to farmers as well. Folks that are just starting out, have something else that's paying the bills, so that way you can be conscientious about developing something new. Does that help answer the question, Robin?
Yeah, thank you. That was very inspiring. Appreciate that.
Thanks, man. It's just my life. All right, folks. It was a distinct pleasure to see all of your shining faces here today. I really hope you enjoy the course and you go through the materials and you interact with each other and with me. I hope you ask lots of questions. There's lots of questions here to be asked, kind of ad nauseum. There's lots of things I don't know. There's lots of things that your colleagues and your classmates won't know. So just ask questions, dive deep, and have a lot of fun with it. This is the last thing I'll leave you with. Years ago, I had to be an eco warrior. I had to do this work because, my goodness, the world needed it, and I burnt out terribly. And I then learned to take it more with a grain of salt and to really enjoy my work, to play with design, to move things around, to take sort of a childlike view of this work, to take it from about 3 feet tall and a wondrous eye, like, oh, what's going on here? Why does that happen? And why does that interact with that? And that has propelled me since, to the point to where I really don't get burnt out all that much anymore, because I'm at a state of joyous inquiry with everything. So, it's serious work, but it's not so serious that if you take it too seriously, you can't do it anymore. So play with it, play with the drawings, play with the designs, ask lots of questions. And I'm really excited to walk through this with all of you. So thank you so much. We will meet again in 2 weeks' time for another hour of this. Ask me questions as we go along, submit your assignments early. And if anybody has anything they'd like to say, any goodbyes or farewells, now's the time.
I'm curious if you ever went back to the bison grower and saw how it worked.
He did. I did go back. He never hired me for design, but he did terrace it, which he was like, it was against the law. So I will never say that farm's name. But what's amazing about it is it increased the amount of water holding capacity of his pasture. The pasture around those areas then became actually quite a bit more productive. And he started working with a number of fodder trees, and he started working with fruit trees, of which the bison were more than happy to eat the fruit fall that came from them. So overall, he took the concept, which is a lot of what happens these days, is people ask me a conceptual idea. They don't have time or money for the design. They just want my overall understanding of it and a couple of pointers. And he increased the productivity of his bison by just working with instead of against the nature of the landscape. Great question. Thanks.
Awesome.
Cool, folks. Thanks so much. We'll catch you in a couple of weeks. Bye.
Bye.